Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested independently by a few viewers, which generally means that it probably happened somewhere in real life or was otherwise the source of an online discussion. Amy plays Saw in half against Nick's Tarmogoyf. What are the power and toughness of the resulting tokens? For the purposes of this question, we'll say the Tarmogoyf starts out as a 1-2 with lands as the only cards in any graveyard. Okay, so Saw in half says that the tokens are copies of Tarmogoyf except that they have a specific power and toughness. When applying a copy effect that provides a specific set of values for a certain characteristic, any characteristic defining abilities of the object being copied that define that characteristic are not copied. Whew, that was pretty technical, so let's work through that phrase by applying it to the concrete example from the original problem statement. Saw in half's copy effect has an exception that defines what the token's power and toughness will be, which are part of the token's characteristics. Therefore, when applying this copy effect, any characteristic defining abilities on Tarmogoyf that define power or toughness are not copied. This means the tokens will not have any abilities at all. Unlike a normal Tarmogoyf, the token's power and toughness will be locked in at the time when they're created. Amusingly, another consequence of this is that the tokens will be buffed by Merganda petroglyphs, even though the original Tarmogoyf was not. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. We need to calculate what the power and toughness of those tokens will be. Now, we said the Tarmogoyf started out as just a 1-2 from seeing a land. But will the Saw in half hit the graveyard in time for instant to be counted in that total? Or, hey, maybe Tarmogoyf will be able to count itself as a creature. We'll start with the easy one first. Saw in half is not put into Amy's graveyard until after all the steps of its resolution have been completed. Therefore, there's no way the tokens will count instants because Saw in half does not go to the graveyard until after the tokens have been created. Now, the case of Tarmogoyf itself is actually a little bit more interesting, though. Rules veterans right now might be thinking that this trick sounds just crazy enough to work. After all, the instructions of Saw in half are followed in the order that they're written, so the Tarmogoyf does hit the graveyard before the tokens are created. Also, characteristic defining abilities work in the graveyard, so that means after it's destroyed, the game will consider the Tarmogoyf to be a 2-3 because it sees that there's now a creature card in the graveyard. Unfortunately, this is where the fun police are going to step in. If you read carefully, Saw in half bases the power and toughness of the tokens on that creature's power and toughness. The wording "that creature," in contrast to "that creature card," tells the game that it needs information about a permanent on the battlefield. Since the Tarmogoyf is in the graveyard by this time, this rule says the game will look at the power and toughness of the Tarmogoyf as it last existed on the battlefield, rather than the power and toughness of the Tarmogoyf card in the graveyard. Most effects that do something similar work the exact same way. For an example of a template that looks at the characteristics of the card after it's left the battlefield, check out Deicide. Notice that this text says that it checks the creature type of the exiled card. Advanced viewers can speculate about the reasoning for this special templating in the comments. But for now, we'll wrap up by saying that the creature tokens created by Saw in half will be half of 1-2, rounded up. In other words, 1-1. Because that's what the Tarmogoyf's power and toughness were as it last existed on the battlefield. Let's observe that in this specific case, Nick ends up a little bit shortchanged since his tokens would have been bigger if Saw in half were worded such that it could check the power and toughness in the graveyard. On the other hand, the actual wording of this card allows it to see any effects that might be acting on the targeted creature's power or toughness while it was on the battlefield, which is a lot more common of a situation. For example, if the Tarmogoyf had any +1/+1 counters on it, or any buffs from auras or equipment or anthems, or even a giant growth at the time it left the battlefield, all of those would be getting taken into account when Saw in half was determining what size of tokens to create. That's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.